vast experience in international transactions, disputes, and projects. He is highly recommended by global and domestic directories such as Chambers and Partners, RSG, the Legal 500, IFLR 1000, Asia Law, Forbes India, Legal Era, and the India Business Law Journal in his practice areas. So he brings a great deal of expertise to the table. We have Graham Richmond here, who is a partner from our projects practice group in London. He has a particular focus on renewable power project development and procurement, and an increasing focus on energy companies and corporates and their role in the energy transition and progression towards sustainability goals. On the end, we have Enrique Benitez, a partner from our Dentons Santiago office, and he is the co-lead of the Dentons energy sector for Latin America and the Caribbean region. He advises Chilean and foreign companies on developing energy, oil and gas, mining, and agricultural projects on regulatory and contractual matters, and he has been recognized by Best Lawyers for his excellence in environmental and natural resources law. And then joining us remotely, even though the hour is late where he is Thomas Schubert, a partner in our Berlin office. And he is the head of both the German Energy Group and the European Venture Technology Group. And he's co-lead of the German Corporate Practice Group as well. He focuses on advising national and international companies and investors on M&A and transactions, corporate reorganizations and insolvencies, private equity transactions, venture capital investments and joint ventures, with a particular focus on the energy and renewable energy industries, as well as technology, biotech, and automotive sectors. And he has also been recognized by Best Lawyers for his excellence in corporate law, M&A, and venture capital. So we have a panel of our very best experts from around the world on energy issues here. And we thought we would talk about some of the issues that we have discussed today. But first, I thought I would have them each give us maybe about a quick 2 minutes on how their region has been perceiving and responding to what the U.S. has been doing in the energy sector. So, Anand, what are you seeing from India?
Well, thanks, Emma, and thank you for having us. So quickly, I just wanted to touch on three important aspects. One was India's overall strategy for renewable power. And at the COP26 Global Summit, India has announced that we are targeting a net zero by 2070, which is extended by 10 or 12 years. But the important thing is that we have committed to 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel by 2030, and 50% of energy from renewables with a 45% reduction in carbon intensity. What that has done is that the total installed renewable capacity has already reached 220 gigawatts today. And we are seeing a compounded annual growth rate of 15.4% per year on renewable energy. In February 2025, Prime Minister Modi did visit United States, and India and United States committed to the nuclear power mission. India has come out with the national nuclear policy, where and just to give you a sense, India has only 1.2% of its energy mix as nuclear power, compared to United States 9.8%. And so basically, what India committed to was that that we agreed under the US-India 123 agreement, earlier signed in 2008, that India will advance its plans to construct US-designed reactors in India, and basically announced that there will be 5 SMRs built by 2032 to answer that. And in March 2025, the US Department of Energy has also approved the company Holtec International to transfer SMR technology to India. All of this is seen in a very positive light. Of course, later maybe I'll tell you more about nuclear energy. On the US decision to double its LNG capacity by 2040, India has responded very, very favorably. India is, of course, the world's fourth largest LNG importer today, and has increased its share of LNG from 6 to 15% by 2030. That's what it is projected. And US is India's second biggest supplier of crude oil and LNG now. India will become the largest importer of oil, surpassing China in 2030. And US imports have grown or more than doubled from 3% to 8%. So India has responded in every possible way. Like, on one hand, it's continued its mission for renewable power, but on the other hand, it has responded to the ask of SMRs. Although in India, it's said that there are only two proven technologies of SMRs, with one Russian and one Chinese, and more than 80 under development, but not proven. But I think when my Prime Minister Modi was here, he was, I think, uh, in discussions, and they announced the SMR, and there's a lot of action in India around it.
Greg, what's going on in the UK? I know you guys have a lot going on today.
I was going to say, you can thank us for looking after President Trump for a couple of days this week for you. We're going to talk about nuclear, and there's some immediate announcements that have been made today coinciding with his trip, obviously. But in terms of a wider reaction to US energy policy, effectively the UK, and we'll hear from Europe, the position is almost the opposite. We are fully committed to the renewable energy transition. Our Clean Power 2030 action plan is aiming for at least 95% of GB's electricity will be from clean sources by 2030. So that's obviously a lot of renewables. It's onshore solar and wind, a lot of offshore wind, but also nuclear. Slightly in contrast to certain European jurisdictions, we are committed to nuclear as well. Contrast drill baby drill with there are no new, and it's been the same for a while now, there are no new extractive licenses being granted in the North Sea for UK oil and gas extraction. The effective tax rate on the extractive industry in the UK is 78% tax. So that's had the desired impact of curtailing production from what is already an aging and depleted field, which requires, so the cost of extraction is higher in the UK, and then if you add a 78% tax rate on top of that, it has had the desired effect. That was actually a policy that we've got a Labour government now, a left-leaning government for the last year, but bear in mind that we've had a Conservative government for the 10 years prior to that, and these are policies that were Conservative government policies, and Labour has continued them so far. So I think the area of confluence that we have at the moment with US energy policy, which is being lent into this week, is on nuclear. And there have been some announcements today, which I'll circle back to. We are an LNG buyer still. Gas is anything between 40 to 60% of our power generation, depending on how windy or sunny it is on a particular day. So we are in the market for LNG. There's still a role for gas in our electricity system, but we talk about gas as abated gas. So we're looking at these technologies effectively, such as carbon capture. New build gas must have carbon capture in the UK, otherwise it won't be consented. So the reaction, I think, is political to the US. What we've had is, as opposed to 10 years of Conservatives who had implemented these policies, now the Conservative Party literally earlier this month in September has, now that they are in opposition, they have shifted their official policy to being in favour of maximising extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea. And this, I think, is partly in reaction to Trump, but mainly in reaction to the Reform Party in the UK. Some of you may be familiar with Nigel Farage, who would be grateful if you could have him this way more often. Actually, but the Reform Party has effectively in the UK politically has sucked the base out of the Tory Party within the last 5 years, and the Reforms Party's policy on North Sea oil and gas is that they would open it up for drilling as a day one priority. So the Conservative shift is more, I think, a reaction to its domestic political challenger rather than necessarily, international influences. But that it is still a US reaction, I think, from one step removed. So I think there's a political reaction on the more right side of politics, and the otherwise the area of confluence, I think, is nuclear in the UK.
Thank you. Thomas, what's been happening in Europe?
Well, I mean, you've been asking how we are reacting or responding to what's happening in the US. Main reaction that we are seeing is that we are responding to tariffs. Whenever they touch upon cars or good wine, then that's a strong reaction from the European front. No, but on the energy sector, indeed, we see a structural shift in the overall energy landscape, which is kind of like very different or kind of opposite of what we are seeing in the US. Maybe looking at the technologies or the sources of energy with regard to, starting with hydrocarbons, I mean, natural gas. Germany has stopped using Russian gas, importing Russian gas. Overall, the EU is phasing out from Russian gas by 27, which of course means that this supply is being replaced by LNG, and a major portion of that is coming from the US. So there's a direct import to the drill policies in the US, but rather driven not by US politics, but by what's happening on the continent. I mean, talking about coal, where US is big, I understand, or growing bigger now again. The development in Europe is totally different. There's a consistent decline in the use of coal, went down nearly 50% since 2018. Germany remains committed to phase out by 2038, and some European countries are already entirely coal-free, so not firing coal any longer. The main driver for the development is are the renewables, and we do see a constant build-out of renewables. Just to give you some numbers, EU-wide, the production or net electricity generation coming from renewables was around 40%. In Germany, it was even 60% coming from renewables, so that's a relevant share. Main drivers are, of course, PV and onshore wind, but offshore wind is gaining a bigger role over time, and is mainly build-outs in the North Sea, but also some in the Baltics. But the industry is currently struggling mainly for supply chain issues and missing port infrastructure. So it's hard to meet the build-out targets if the infrastructure isn't there. Last but not least, I think we should briefly look at carbon emission reductions, so that the goal stays that EU is on the path to net zero. It's still committed to meet its targets, the so-called Fit for 55 package, meaning that the emissions will be down by 55% compared to 1990 by 2030, and the EU will be climate neutral by 2050. Germany would like to achieve that goal even 5 years before. So overall, I think a clear tendency towards decarbonization and build-up of renewables, but the landscape is uneven. So if you're looking at the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, they're kind of like leading. Germany is somewhere in between. France benefits from its nuclear power, and many Central and East European countries are still struggling with legacy infrastructure and, of course, political opinion in their respective countries. But looking at new technologies for decarbonization, CCS, CCUS, and Graham alluded to this already. That's something which is now also coming in Germany. New legislation will be enacted in the next couple of weeks or even months or even weeks. And CCS shall become a climate protection technology and also to be exported. from Germany. And maybe one last word on green hydrogen. Big targets were set 3-4 years ago, but the industry hasn't yet taken up proper momentum. There's still the challenge of not having a proper market for green hydrogen, but hopefully that will develop over time, because that's a crucial element towards decarbonization of the industry. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Enrique, what is happening in Latin America?
Well, thank you. First, I would like to thank for the invitation for participating in this panel, and congratulations for this great summit. Well, regarding the Latin America and the shift of the United States moving from renewables to fossil fuels, Latin America is quite a diverse region when we talk about energy. From one side, we have countries like Argentina, Mexico, Bolivia, and most of the Caribbean islands that were quite dependent on fossil fuels. So they are quite happy with this shift. On the other side, we have countries like Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, who are quite committed with the climate goals under the Paris Agreement. And so this shift from the United States, and let's say not only from the United States, but also from some European countries, which has, although at the beginning they were very keen in trying to, comply with the climate goals, and nowadays they have been seeing that maybe it's not as good as it should be. So this is making troubles in Latin America for sure, and some policymakers have already started saying, guys, if European countries, if the United States, the most developed country in the world, the most richest country, is shifting towards fossil fuels, maybe it's something that we should do too, because fossil fuels generation, it's quite secure, and relying only in renewables, it could be a politically cost decision. So I think some countries have reoriented their policy and rethinking in maybe changing a little bit in moving towards fossil fuels. And well, we have to see what comes to, out of this, but still there is some discussion because of the United States moving towards or shifting to more fossil fuel.
Interesting. So a couple of you have mentioned nuclear. Graham, since it sounds like you have some breaking news, why don't we start with you? Caught you out, didn't I?
Yeah. And I turn this off. So we are committed to nuclear in the UK. Effectively, our first generation of the nuclear fleet will all be shutting down by 2030. So it's been a long known and issue in the UK. And it was interesting hearing, I think it was Armand earlier talking about that first of a kind nuclear issue. The knowledge from the previous generation has been lost, and so the first project is a first of a kind. I mean, we have been living exactly that in the UK for the last 15 years, because that's been effectively the timeline that the Hinkley Point C new nuclear generation facility has taken to build, and it's been in the construction process for at least 12 years. It's a new build, first of a kind, using EDF technology, will be owned and operated by EDF. That unit first unit is expected to come online in 2031. They say 2029 to 2031, but we've all learnt to go for the furthest date whenever there's been an announcement. Likewise, the cost is projected to be £47 billion. So that you round up in for the dollar equivalent. So that's our first new build nuclear facility in a generation, should be coming online in 2031. We're then, to a point earlier, we are then going to roll out the second Hinkley at another facility called Sizewell, which the government has just, in this year's spending review, has just committed to, finally, after many years of prevaricating. Government's going to take a bigger role in this, having learnt from the Hinckley experience. The government is taking a direct 45% equity share in that, and has allocated £14 billion towards the build-out for Sizewell, which they're projecting will be 38 billion in total. So the saving from Hinckley to Sizewell, a repeat project effectively at a different location, but same technology and learnings, etc. The discount is sort of from 47 billion down to 38 billion for the repeat job. So to the points raised earlier about the approach to nuclear, we've very much lived through that in the UK in the last decade. We've also SMRs. We're committed to SMRs. We've qualified Rolls-Royce as the chosen technology provider in the UK for the first SMR demonstration project, which will be receiving government funding. 2.5 billion, I think, direct funding from the government. And then this today has been announced, the Atlantic Partnership for Advanced Nuclear Energy. So this is, I think, focused more on the advanced modular reactors, where the US and the UK are aligning to accelerate the development process by effectively, if there's been a reactor safety approval in one country, it will be automatically recognised in the other, between the UK and the US. That's projected to reduce the licensing timeline from 3 to 4 years to about 2 years. And that has very much the Rolls-Royce SMR design in mind. And the commercial deals, I didn't realise this, I learnt something today. X-Energy was mentioned. I had no idea that Amazon had invested in X-Energy, but one of the deals announced today was that X-Energy and Centrica, which is a UK utility, are looking at a deal to bring in the X-Energy's reactor into the UK at a site in the north of England, and other cross-Atlantic partnerships have been announced with Tritax and EDF today for an SMR, Last Energy and DP World for a small and micro reactor at a port in the UK, which will have a data center development. I think they're actually our client as well, so hopefully we get to see what comes of that. TerraPower and KBR for conducting, I think, a nuclear fuel study, and also something with a nuclear fuel study, I think, with Urenco and Radiant Energy. So this was all just 5 commercial partnerships announced today to coincide with President Trump's state visit. But as always with these things, you take that with a pinch of salt as to what will actually go forwards. But in general, nuclear for the UK is something we're very much invested in, and we're in for the long haul.
Anand, I know you have a lot going on with nuclear in India as well.
Yeah, I think India has just woken up that we had the 2008 123 agreement, and I guess United States reminded us about it after Mr. Trump came to power. But the national nuclear mission that has been now, it states that we have to reach 100 gigawatts by 2047. We are at 8 gigawatts right now, and the immediate target is for 22 gigawatts by 2032. And the focus is obviously on indigenous technology, safety protocols, and a lot of international collaboration. The problem there is the Atomic Energy Act and the Civil Liability Act in India, which is in the budget. The government has announced that it will take a relook at those laws, since those laws provide for the supplier of equipment to be liable as well as the operator. So for patent and latent defects or for substandard services. India has agreed to operationalize 5 SMRs by 2033, as I said, and committed $2.2 billion for just the research and development of SMRs. 100% foreign direct investment has been permitted to manufacture of nuclear reactors and components, R&D, and supply of material. The Nuclear Power Corporation of India has already floated an RFP to identify strategic partners and participation in upcoming reactors. I already told you about Holtec being approved by the Department of Energy in United States to transfer technology to India. India has signed at the Jaipur nuclear power project with French EDF, just like UK. They are developing 6 European pressurized reactors of 1730 megawatts capacity each, aggregating to 10 gigawatts. And in February 2025, India has also signed for advanced modular reactors with France. With Russia, India has signed, already built 2 units at the Kundakulam nuclear power project, KKNP as it's called. So 2 units have been operational of 1 gigawatts each in 2013 and 16. And unit 3, 4, 5, and 6 have started construction in 2017 and 21. Also, the Russian Rosatom, the Russian government-owned company has signed a MOU to develop thorium-based SMR. India has, of course, one of the largest deposits of thorium, and thorium needs to be broken into uranium to be fissionable. And of course, we have entered into agreements with Canada, Australia. India has been elected to the Nuclear Suppliers Group recently, which allows us to buy uranium from a lot of countries. And India has now ratified the 2016 UK agreement and now also has signed with Japan for import of nuclear technology. So all of a sudden, nuclear technology seems to be like everybody's woken up and realized that renewable energy alone will not be like wind and solar will not take you across. You need constant power, steady power. So nuclear seems to be the next step.
Very good. Enrique, what has been happening with nuclear in Latin America?
Well, there's something happening in Latin America also. What you may know, countries like Argentina built their first nuclear power plants in the 70s. They're quite old right nowadays, but they built 2. They have a third one under construction. It has been under construction for 10 years, so nobody knows when it's going to be finished, but still it's under construction. The same thing happens in Brazil. They have one, and they have a second one under construction for the last 15 years. So let's say we have some discussions on nuclear in Latin America, but climate change in terms of renewable sources and are creating demand for more stable, low carbon based energy. And in that case, nuclear may play an important role. And so there are discussions in all our countries about having or building new nuclear power plants. But more than big ones, SMR. Argentina is already building one. Again, they have been building it for the last 2 years, and apparently they are reviewing the design because it seems to be a little bit obsolete nowadays. But still, they were the first in the world to start the construction of an SMR. And countries like Chile, for example, are looking also at SMSR for supplying mining projects. Mining projects are huge needs of energy, 700, 800, a gigawatt of energy for just one project. So this SMR could be a great solution when they are isolated or remote mining projects. So for sure, this is something that's been discussed. It's not easy because we have earthquakes and all those kind of things. If you remember the tsunami in Japan, well, the problem was not the earthquake, was the tsunami, but still. But there are discussions. In all Latin Americans, they're interested in nuclear technology also, and there is something that has been under discussion and studies.
Thomas, Europe is a bit unique on nuclear, and I know Germany in particular has a somewhat different view than some of its neighbors. So why don't you tell us what you're seeing in your region on nuclear?
Well, maybe first start with the overall numbers, which are that nuclear power represents 25% of the EU-wide power production. So it's super relevant in the EU. But as you rightfully pointed out, the landscape is pretty diverse. I mean, for example, France is embracing nuclear power. Central Eastern Europe, they are ramping up. Some of the countries haven't had any nuclear facilities yet, but they are considering building or are already in the process of doing so. And compared to this, Germany has entirely phased out. More than 2 years ago, this was in April 2023 when Germany shut down its last 3 nuclear power plants. And a re-entry is rather realistic on the German level, just for political reasons. It's just a general political opinion, which is not supportive to nuclear power. Back to Europe, I think we need to distinguish a little between the 3 major technologies, being conventional nuclear or nuclear fission, where there will be an increase of the capacity. Currently, we are around 100 gigawatts. This will slightly increase, but only modestly. Whereas on the SMR front, and we already heard this from the other speakers, the development and commercialization of existing, and there is already substantial investment activity and policy support for these projects. There's a European Industrial Alliance formed for the acceleration of SMRs, and they are aiming to accelerate the development and deployment of the first installations by the early 2030s. The third area is a very interesting one, which is likely, or which does have the potential to become big, which is nuclear fusion. As you know, the EU is a major participant in the ITER project, this kind of global initiative for the demonstrating feasibility of nuclear fusion. And there's also significant EU funding being made available for fusion, and fusion has been seen as one of the pillars for clean energy supply in the future. And here, interestingly, Germany comes in again, because despite the fact that at least conventional nuclear likely won't re-enter the German market, there are a lot of companies pretty active, or growth companies in Germany. For example, Focused Energy, Proxima Fusion, Marvel Fusion, Gauss Fusion. They're all still in the growth stage. They have raised some of them hundreds of millions for their projects, and they are developing the technology. And I mean, let's see. As you know, if you talk to someone from the industry, they're always saying that the point of commercialization is around 20 years from now, if you talk about nuclear fusion. Let's see whether this will be true or whether it will take entirely. But at least prospects are there, and a lot of money goes into that sector.
So similar to nuclear, a lot of the regions are viewing battery energy storage systems as being essential to an emissions-free power grid. And we are seeing some momentum on BESS in the US, particularly as more regions are trying to increase dispatchable power and reliability of the grid. What are each of you seeing in your region? Enrique, let's start with you this time.
Thank you. Regarding storage, is related nowadays in Latin America. I mean, because mainly in the countries that bet for the renewable energy, because renewable energy is outspacing grid flexibility. The countries have not built the transmission lines that are needed in order to be able to evacuate all the energy that the renewable projects generate. And so one of the alternatives for reducing that is building storage projects. And so all the countries, or many countries, had issued regulations in the last years in order to establish that storage facilities are part of the system. So nowadays they not only get payment for the energy they put into the system, but also for power. They're considered as a system, and so they get paid for the power, which is quite an important difference in order to encourage the construction. Nowadays, in the case of Chile, you every day you see an announcement of a new storage facility, NG, EDF, 1,000 megawatts. No, huge projects have been announced in our countries. And storage is looked not just for energy shifting, which is how it started, but also, and it's something that was discussed earlier today, is also because of frequency regulation and because backup, and also to back up. I don't know if you have heard, but in last February, Chile, which is supposed to have one of the most reliable energy systems in Latin America and probably in the world, we suffered a blackout, and the blackout happened because some companies had not made investments in security systems. I don't know the word in English, so I will say, and the investments were about $800,000. The blackout for one day cost us almost $1 billion. So that's, and everyone is saying that if we would have had at that time the huge project, best projects that get started and injecting energy into the system, probably the blackout could have been yes. So storage projects are something that are looked as very important, as I said, not only for energy shifting, but also for backup, for reliance in the system, and for stopping curtailment of many projects in our countries.
Thomas, how about in Europe? What's going on with
Couldn't
this?
agree more. I couldn't agree more. No, a European view is very similar. I mean, energy storage is indeed super essential for providing flexibility, but also stability and reliability in the grid. And in particular, given the build-out targets that we have for renewables or renewable energy in the system being around 70% by 2030, and that growing to over 80% of renewables by 2050. This means that there has to be some backup capacity to take off the volatility of renewable generation. Another factor, and Enrique alluded to this already, is also the grid stability, kind of like balancing of supply and demand, optimization of energy use. But also the resilience element, having sufficient backup capacity coming from batteries. And in light of all of these advantages, we've seen a massive build-out of BESS across Europe, which was mainly driven by the fact that there was a huge price decline for batteries in the last 1 to 2 years. And we've seen that build-out, especially in Germany, Italy, the UK, France, and Spain. Again, some numbers, current capacity end of 2024 was 60 gigawatt hours of BESS capacity available in Europe. This 60 gigawatt will likely increase by more than 50% by the end of this year. And the expectations are that likely by 2030, we'll reach more than 400 gigawatt hours of BESS capacity. So that's massive. And these installations are, on one hand, co-located installations combined with a PV project or a wind farm to shape in the generation profile of the respective project, but also more and more standalone projects, which indeed contribute especially to the grid stability and may even reduce the costs for the build out of transmission lines. Yeah, that's where we are. I mean, Germany is also super strong on residential BESS applications. So consumers putting the battery in their basement and by that making use of or gaining energy independence for themselves. The big challenge which we have in Germany still is that there isn't yet a proper integration of BESS installations into the overall energy system. So most of the projects well, they work without any subsidies, and they're just, well, trading energy on a day-to-day basis and are working with that. And but it's expected that the legislator understands the benefit or the advantages of BESS and will support with some more stable legislation, which will definitely be helpful to continue with the build out of the technology.
Graham, what is going on with BESS in the US, in the UK?
The UK has been a strong market for BESS. It's been the leader, I think, in the European market in terms of deployment of BESS, and the reasons for that is actually we've got a particularly unstable grid in the UK, so the need for BESS was greater, and the commercial attractiveness of the asset class is very good in the UK because there are multiple revenues available to BESS in the UK. You can get a capacity market contract, which is to effectively be available to provide capacity for the system. You can also provide ancillary services, frequency response, fast frequency response support to the network, and you're able to just price arbitrage during the day. So it has been quite an attractive asset class, which has for the UK market. We've got 15 gigawatts of operational BESS capacity, and we will double that within the next few years. We've got quite high. It's necessary across the whole of Europe because there's quite a high renewables penetration on the system already. So the system needs the support from storage. They need to load shift to a certain extent, and that actually creates attractiveness for BESS operators because there's also a huge difference in intraday pricing sometimes because of the renewables penetration, particularly solar or wind in the UK. On a windy day, you can have negative pricing in the middle of the day, but if the wind stops and then the gas-fired power plants have to fire up for the evening peak, then the market price will go from zero to a gas-based price in the evening. So if you've had a BESS that was charging at zero and then just discharges at the peak, the price arbitrage they're making is very good. But that it becomes incredibly, it's so complicated now, the system, because we've got this high renewables penetration, then this increasing volume of BESS on the system as well. So the forward curves and the projections for each of these technologies is starting to become quite challenging, and challenging for attracting finance, and particularly project finance, debt, non-recourse finance. So there are challenges to come, but it is still, these projects are still being banked very strongly at the moment. I'll just mention long duration storage. There's a program now, there's a support package in place for long duration storage. This is in excess of 4 to 6 hours. So what that really means for the UK at the moment is pumped hydro storage. We've got very good resources for that, particularly in Scotland, which has got lots of hills and lots of rain. So there are lots of projects in the north of England and Scotland looking for at the long duration storage package, which will support them. So effectively what they will then do is, when there's lots of energy on the system, they will use that to pump water uphill into a reservoir at the top of the hill. So effectively using electricity from the grid to do that, drawing electricity from the grid, and then in a low generation scenario, they just work like a dam effectively. They just release the water through a turbine and they become a generator. So there are lots of projects in the UK queuing up for that, in the north and in Scotland as well.
That's interesting. Anand, what are you seeing are you seeing the same kind of popularity of BESS in India?
Well, Yeah, thank you. Basically, in India, what has happened is that we were so keen to meet our renewable energy target that we continue to have like T&D transmission and distribution losses continue to accumulate. And when they exceeded 20%, you know, the government kind of woke up and said, oh, but we need to promote energy storage. And only in the last 4 years that we have now started focusing on why, the government is giving now viability gap funding. It is promoting a production linked, incentive scheme for ACC battery manufacturing. Energy storage obligations for discoms have now been prescribed, which say that, there is a minimum 2 hour co-located BESS for renewable energy projects, which should be at least of 10% capacity. Just to give you a size, comparison, India's total BESS capacity has reached only 204.5 megawatts. So we are way behind when you were to say that India's total installed capacity is in excess of 480 gigawatts today, of which half, 220, is renewable power. So the 20% T&D losses, are leading to a big energy wastage. What India has done, as I said, is prescribe, of course, several energy incentives. At the same time, uh, they have prescribed, a deviation settlement mechanism. So all energy producers, the variable energy producers, are supposed to give a schedule to the utility about what would be their. So they get 15 minutes slots, so 24 hours, so 90 odd slots. And if you were to deviate in power, there is a charge that is levied on you. So everybody is incentivized to get into BESS and have those capacities so that there is a steady power that is introduced to the grid. There is a deviation, like deviations are not kind of promoted. And a lot of this has been triggered because India is seeing a big push for data centers, just like not to the level of United States, but we are looking at potentially more than 14,000 data centers come up in the next 5 years. And data centers need steady demand, parallel two lines of power with one backup. And so BESS is definitely, a big area of growth and investment in the country. There's a lot of action happening. And even for lithium batteries, there is now focus on generating enough recycling capabilities for batteries. And of course, in the EV space, again, there's a lot of work that's happening.
So to wrap up, so, yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So to wrap up our discussion, we thought it would be, we would delve a little bit into the grid infrastructure issues. And in the US, I think everyone is pretty familiar with the issues of transmission constraints and interconnection queues. And there's been a real push to reform the interconnection process and to streamline the permitting processes. And so be interested to hear what is happening in other regions, if you're seeing similar infrastructure issues, and if so, what has been the policy approaches to addressing them. I'm going to go to Thomas first on this one.
I mean, in Europe, continental Europe, the situation is similar to what you've already summarized for the US. Likely most of you have heard of that massive blackout end of April in Spain, which was likely caused by mismanagement of a PV plant, but also by a pretty weak grid infrastructure in Spain, which was the reason why it took so long really to, get power up again. And I mean, the challenges that the grid is facing are very similar across Europe. One thing really is the aging grid infrastructure, which is not made to accommodate the renewable energy, especially not the amounts of renewables that are currently already on grid. And I mean, as I've mentioned, this will be increased over time. And at the same time, this rapid expansion of renewables causes already grid congestions because of the integration of that power, and the grid is just not made for it. So the clear understanding is, not just from industry, but also for politics, that the grid has to be strengthened. But in doing so, there are challenges, again, coming from the supply chain side. One thing super important is the sourcing of secure components to avoid, too much Chinese components being built into that infrastructure. But also geopolitical factors, prices, and market volatility, and so on. So that makes it hard to get these projects being done from a sourcing side. But likely the biggest challenge that we see all over Europe is the regulatory complexities. It is always like year-long processes, likely similar to the US, that no one wants to. Everyone is in favor of a strengthened grid, but no one wants to have it in its backyard, and it's a problem that we are facing. And so, how's the EU reacting to this? On the money side of things, there are initiatives, and there's money being invested into grid infrastructure. And the amount that I've seen was around 500 billion to be spent until the end of 2030. So the next 4.5 years, quite a decent amount that will go into that space. And at the same time, the EU is planning to reform the legislative framework and enhance planning, permitting, and cross-sector integration. We see this partially in Germany already, where I can see that the legislature is supporting these projects, but still the whole planning process is holding these projects back and is kind of like slowing down the build out of the infrastructure. On European level, what's also happening is that not just the grid infrastructure as such, but also the overall digital infrastructure shall be strengthened to allow, again, to a better integration of renewables, just to run the project smartly. And the overall goal is to not only strengthen the grid, but to finally align energy security with the objectives, or the climate goal objectives, the path to net zero, and by that, gain resilience in the overall, challenging energy landscape, I'd say. So that's where we are. A lot of things that are being understood, but it will take some time to properly implement.
Does sound very similar to the US. Enrique, how about Latin America?
Same thing. The same thing as in Europe. The problem is that transmission lines, grid, has been always thought as an infrastructure, a background infrastructure, is something of not as strategic, and that thing has been a wrong approach in all our countries. They think, okay, if we need a line, we can build it in a year. That's bullshit. I mean, building a line, depending on the line, of course, but it could take 5 years. or more. So, and as far as we don't get that transmission line, if you want to have a very reliable, resilient energy system, you must have a very strong transmission system. Otherwise, you have nothing. So it was amazing to hear, but that England, the United Kingdom, it has problems in its transmission lines. And yes, we're facing the same problems as in Europe and the United States, everywhere, and countries are trying to move forward, starting bidding processes for building new transmission lines. But yes, that will take several years, and we have to look for solutions right now. BESS is one of the solutions. We hope that they are built.
Yep. Anand, how about in India?
Well, similar. India's transmission grid infrastructure is quite outdated. One of the bigger risks that we are facing is land acquisition, where again there is a lot of policy change. The government is trying to focus on getting land access quickly. The government has been seized of this issue for a long time. And basically, they came up with the Green Energy Corridors mission. They came up with the Green Energy Corridor, which is these heavy energy panels which have been fixed, so that at least the country has a common power grid. There is also the second initiative of smart grid mission, which is more local towards the regional. And as Thomas said, there is a move to take over the debt of the discoms, and help in kind of mobilizing funds. So the initiatives are the same, I think, consistent with Europe, and the demand is obviously acute because India is, like how Prime Minister Modi says, we are building for yesterday. So we are not even current to our demand. There's a lot to be done. So yeah, so it's pretty much the same.
And Graham, the UK?
Yeah, I wish I could say it was different in the UK, but grid is the single biggest challenge in the UK. It is what kills projects on an almost daily basis, and that's both I'm more typically dealing with generation, but also demand side as well. And this is where the data center, the beast of the data, the hyperscale data center comes into play as well. So effectively, we've got aging infrastructure, but if you also think of the way the system works now, it was designed when it was originally built. It was designed for a completely different function from what there is. It was big bulk generation, moving bulk of power to population centres, and now we've got this just huge amount of distributed energy coming onto the grid at all of the different connection points. Plus, in the UK, we have a big geographical difference of effectively a wall of power in the North Sea with the offshore wind around the north of England and Scotland, but no one lives there. Everybody lives in the south of England, which on an American scale is not very big, but we have to effectively move all of the power that's generated at one end of the country, and all of it gets used at precisely the opposite end of the country. So that's been a big challenge, and hence why BESS has been very supported in the UK, and has been an economic asset class in the UK, ahead of other jurisdictions. But what we're doing is all the things that have been discussed today. There's a massive £35 billion investment programme. We have 17 major projects going on across our T network in the UK. So lots of transmission wires in the ground and upgrades going on at the moment. So that's projected 35 billion to 2031. That's the investment over the next few years. And there's also a priority of the grid connection queue is being reformed. It was a first come, first served, but we've had the problem of paper projects and zombie projects effectively clogging up the queue, projects that aren't real effectively. So that whole system is being reformed and reprioritised, and that's literally happening at the moment, or has been happening for the last year, where a project has to prove that it's a real project in order to get put through to the next stage of the application process. And they're also being encouraged, the DNOs and the TSO are being encouraged to make strategic decisions to support the industrial strategy, which is where the data centers come into play. So where they are making their decisions about which generation projects are we going to connect, they should be making those decisions in a way that is facilitating a large demand user as well, or at least factoring in large demand users within their hierarchy of how they make those connection decisions. And that's to encourage data center build out in the UK, as well as planning reforms going through the system at the moment as well in the UK to support data centers as well.